Hi, my name is Brennan Mapes. Today I'll be presenting on my proposed master's thesis project in the Quantitative Methods of the Social Sciences graduate program at Columbia University. My project is focused on the opioid epidemic, specifically quantifying the effects of criminalizing drug use, answering the question if harsh drug policy is killing criminals, or better yet, helping human beings, as it's undoubtedly meant to do. So the research question I'll aim to answer is, what effect does drug policy and legislation that criminalizes drug use have on the opioid epidemic? And because drug overdose has been a leading cause of death in this country for the past 20 years and consistently ranks as one of the top leading causes of death in present day, large investments in research have already been made. So it's important to take stock of the current state of the literature in order to have meaningful contribution on my own. I don't have time for an in-depth literature review in this short presentation, but I will mention two studies and two key takeaways to keep in mind as I design my own research methods for this project. The first study is titled "What Can Be Learned from Cross-National Comparisons of Data on Illegal Drugs," and this piece goes into great detail on the potential dependent variables for study when considering the opioid epidemic when researching the field. And the most commonly studied is drug prevalence, a simple survey question like, have you used drugs in the past 30 days? That is the most accessible data point, the most commonly studied, the most frequently asked survey question in the opioid epidemic, but it's not necessarily the most direct measure of drug-related harm. More direct and more powerful is data on fatal opioid overdoses and emergency room admissions. So my project will favor those more direct measures of study, but will also include mention and consideration of prevalence data just to maintain common ground with the vast majority of research in the field that already exists. Second piece by Soliner and his team highlighted that novel findings in this field of research are most likely found with novel linkages of data sets. He linked criminal justice data, administrative data, like emergency room admissions and fatal overdose data, in 5 or more data sets that he linked together in this piece. He was able to find novel contribution to the field. So in my own study, I'll aim to include a comprehensive linkage of data sets so I can have novel and better my chances of novel findings in this field of research. Now, considering the variables study, as I mentioned, prevalence is the most commonly studied, so I will include that in my own research, but I will favor primarily fatal overdose statistics, but also link together drug arrest data sets and emergency room admissions data sets as suggested by the methods of Soliner's team. And then the independent variable for study is just policy and legislation decriminalizing drug use, and I'll get into a little more detail how I plan to use that as an independent variable study that is quantifiable in my methods section. The methods of this research project are influenced heavily by a researcher here in Columbia's Business School, Damon Phillips, and his student Kylie Huang, in their working paper titled "Entrepreneurship as a Response to Labor Market Discrimination for Formerly Incarcerated People." Now, in this paper, they do policy shock analysis, and in analogy to the opioid epidemic, the best policy shock analysis available is that of legalization of marijuana, which lessens the penalty of drug use, not specifically opioid drug use, but marijuana drug use. This can serve as a proxy of decriminalization of drug use. And in states where marijuana is legalized, I can compare those to states where marijuana is not legal, and then study the effects on the opioid epidemic. And unfortunately, because opioid epidemic policy is fairly uniform across the country, it's not easily quantified, and causal relationships are not easy to reveal in research without variation from state to state. But using legalization of marijuana as a proxy or as my metric for decriminalization of drug use, I should be able to reveal causal relationships. My hypothesis is that policies that decriminalize drug use, in this case legalizing marijuana, do lead to decreases in drug-related harms such as fatal opioid overdoses. And then in my research, I'll hope to address a few tangential questions of the opioid epidemic and more generally drug policy, such as identifying common characteristics of successful drug policy and developing best practices for evaluating drug policy and opioid epidemic response efforts. So thank you for your time.